Chapter 1. "Happy snow day, Queen Anila," a maid greeted. "Happy snow day, Wilhelmina." Anila, Queen of Dargo Island, walked through her palace with a smile on her face. The smile was a mask for her true feelings, however. She was on her way to visit someone she didn't want to see. Andor. He was a traitor who had unleashed a dangerous wizard from his prison and nearly caused the extinction of the entire planet. He was currently being held in his own cell in a dungeon beneath the palace. Anila, wearing a blue robe that felt way too big for her, walked quickly down a circular stairwell. She had left her husband, Reese, in bed because she knew he would want to escort her. He used to be the commander of her army, but she had loved him for a long time, and he had loved her. They had managed to keep their relationship a secret from everyone, though after nearly being decimated by a plague unleashed by the wizard Dargonius, they decided life was too short. When Anila reached the dungeon, she greeted the man guarding Andor. He still wore the traditional blue and yellow paint on his face, though she had deemed it unnecessary. The paint had been used long ago, before her people developed their own language. It was meant to convey emotions to others. The guard hadn't yet grown out of the habit, even though it had been nearly a year since the change in tradition. He snapped to attention. "Your Majesty." "Greetings, Malix. At ease." He stood relaxed as he smiled at her. He couldn't be much older than her 20 years. "I've come to speak with the prisoner," she said. "I would like to be alone." "But, Your Majesty," she held up a hand, "I will be quite all right with him. He's not as dangerous as he'd like you to believe. He's merely a traitor. If you would, please wait outside the dungeon. I will call on you if I need you." Malix nodded and left Anila alone with Andor. Anila peered through the bars, into the dark cell. She saw movement to the right. Someone was sitting on a small bed. The dungeon was lit by torches, but none were close enough to shine into the cell. "Queen Anila," a rough voice said from within. "What brings you down here to this wonderful paradise?" "I've come to see how you're doing. You've been locked away for nearly a year. How do you feel?" "How do you think I feel? My son died of the plague because you refused to release Dargo from his prison, so I took matters into my own hands, and now I'm in my own prison." She sighed. "I'm terribly sorry about your son, but what you did nearly destroyed the rest of the planet. I couldn't allow that." He appeared before her, so close she could smell his unwashed body. His body was broad and muscular, his head bald. "What if it had been your son stricken with the plague?" he asked. "What would you have done then? What if the little prince had been dying?" Anila had anticipated that question, but it still shocked her. I don't know what I would have done." "Exactly." Andor spun around and then locked eyes with her again. "How old is he?" "A month." "A month? What a magical age. I remember when my own son was a month old." There was so much anger in his voice that Anila couldn't help but step away from the bars. "If I could bring him back, Andor, I would." "Would you now? Somehow, I don't think you truly mean it." "I do mean it." "What would you do to bring my son back?" Andor's eyes were wide with curiosity. "I already know you wouldn't let the plague wipe out the unknown world, the world we are not a part of. What else could you possibly do if you couldn't do that?" Anila didn't have a response. She simply stood there and stared at him. He turned back to his bed and said, "I know what I would do." Oh? What's that? He lay down on the mattress and said, I'd kill everyone on this island. He stared at her from the darkness. She tried to stare back, but the longer she stood there, the more uncomfortable she grew. She left the dungeon and let Malix resume his watch. Anila left the stifling dungeon and walked into the palace courtyard. It was a winter wonderland. The courtyard was covered in the whitest, purest snow. People danced around, wearing white robes and crystallized masks. It was a tradition nearly as old as the island itself. For some reason, it only snowed every 5 years on Dargo Island. In the old days, the islanders started wearing ice-blue masks that stood out from the white of the snow and danced among the courtyard. Only one part of the island was constantly covered in snow, but that was a result of magic. This snow was natural. The dances were spontaneous, but had managed to become highly synchronized. Dargonians were simply in tune with each other. They danced in a large circle, waving their arms in a way that would make you think of wind blowing through the air. Anila returned to her bedchamber, where she found her husband still sleeping peacefully. She walked over to a crib at the foot of the bed and checked on her son, Maximus. He was a chubby baby, with wild sprouts of blonde hair on his head. He was asleep as well, and she gently touched his face. Then she lay down next to Reese and tried to go back to sleep. "Why did you go down there again?" he asked, startling her. "Because I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing, keeping him locked up." She turned to Reese and saw his face, thanks to the moonlight shining through the balcony door. "And you're no longer wondering?" he asked. "No. He said he would kill everyone on the island if it would bring his son back. He's a dangerous man." Reese kissed her. "Your judgment has never led you astray, my queen. You should never doubt it." She laughed. "Stop calling me your queen. I'm your wife now." "Same difference." They kissed again, but only for a moment, because the entire room lit up like the sun had suddenly risen. "What is that?" Anila asked, shading her eyes with her hand. They looked toward the balcony as a roar grew louder by the second. Reese ran to the door and looked out. "A fire in the sky," he said. Anila joined him and saw the fire as it shot toward them. Whatever it was, it left a smoky trail in the sky. The fire shot over their heads with a deafening roar that woke Maximus in his crib. A moment later, an explosion shook the palace.